Welcome to another episode of Beyond Explanation. My name is Brandon, and today I'm joined by the Soulless Samurai, and we're going to have ourselves a fun day. We have two, well, maybe even more stories for you guys in store, and we're going to basically try to make this a little bit more like when Soulless and I would hang out in person, and we would tell each other these great stories that we would find out, since the last time that we had hung out. So we're going to start off with Soulless, and Soulless is going to tell me a story, and then we're going to kind of see where this goes, and I have one in store for him as well. I think these are going to be mostly UFO related, maybe a little bit different, but we'll see how it goes. It's going to be a little bit more shorter than our normal stuff, so we'll see how everybody likes it. Make sure you hit like, make sure you subscribe. If you enjoy this format, let us know in the comments section below. So what's up, Soulless? Tell me your story.
Hey, buddy. How you doing, Brandon?
Doing great, bud. I'm happy to have you here. It's been a long time since we've been able to do this, so I'm just happy to get back in the swing of things.
Yeah, man, I'm excited. And I have a story for you today from Kecksburg, PA, that took place on December 9th in 1965.
You know, it's funny that you said 1965 because my story is from 1952, and we're both going from times like well beyond before we were born.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, and this one kind of sets off quite a few chains of events surrounding UFOs, particularly that in that area. So it's a real fun jumping off point. So yeah, Kecksburg, PA, December 9th, 1965. A fireball was seen streaking through the sky above Michigan and Ontario, reportedly dropping debris along the way before it crashed to Earth in Kecksburg. Local witnesses felt the impact and saw blue smoke rising from the site. Some residents even claimed to have found the culprit, an acorn-shaped object about the size of a small car with hieroglyphs inscribed around its base. That kind of stuck out to me because...
That was Rendlesham Forest.
Yes, with the hieroglyphs on the craft, right?
Yeah, with our episode that we did about Rendlesham Forest, we talked about that craft that they saw in the woods in Europe had hieroglyphs, some kind of markings that were on the craft.
Yeah, and it was also brought up in, who was that kooky guy that claimed to have had access to, not Area 51, but the place close to it?
Oh, Bob Lazar?
Yes. Oh, Bob Lazar.
Gotta love Bob Lazar.
So, this kind of stands out in UFO lore, this story here, because of the quick response of the military. Within an hour, they started arriving, and the next few hours saw military convoys traveling the road into Kecksburg. But the area was not just flooded with military, as the local Pittsburgh TV and radio news covered the breaking story. People started to flock to the small town. Supposedly armed personnel guarded the crash site, not allowing people to get close, and there are stories of misinformation being spread by the officers. A local jazz musician, we all know we can trust them, he claims armed men ordered him and his crew off of the road to allow a flatbed with a tarp-covered, acorn-shaped object to make its way out of the field. And it was corroborated by other residents who also saw the flatbed removing the tarped object from the scene.
Oh, that's good. It's not just the guys smoking the jazz lettuce.
That's it, the jazz cabbage. So yeah, initial news coverage of the incident told of the fireball in the sky and something unknown crashing into the ground. Shortly, the official stance changed to what is still on the books today. There was a bright light in the sky. People reported seeing something hit the ground. There was a search, but nothing was ever found. Quote, "It was people's imagination. They had seen a bright meteor in the sky, but nothing had fallen to the ground," unquote. And that's from Stan Gordon, and I think he's just mimicking what the authorities said on the subject, because Stan Gordon actually runs a UFO and Bigfoot research organization in the area.
Do you know if this was investigated by Project Blue Book at all?
I'm not sure.
It's interesting because that, it was a meteor. That's going to run a theme in both of our stories.
Ah, okay. So a very short distance away and a little over a year later, we're going to move to spring of 1966 in Latrobe, PA. A woman awoke to her dog barking excitedly in the middle of the night. Upon taking the dog outside, she found a large silver object hovering about 80 feet over her house. It spun like a top and was bathed in a red glow. After a few minutes, it shot into the sky and disappeared. The witness was ridiculed by friends and family for her claims. And later that year,
Hang on. So we got, it was a fireball in the sky. You said red glow?
Yes, bathed in a red glow. And it was hovering about 80 feet off the ground, hovering like spinning like a top.
Okay. Now, how many times have you heard that in different UFO stories where they're like just above tree level or something of that nature, and they hover and they have like a bit of a glow about them, but yet they're able to have that change of direction? So it's interesting because you always wonder if that is like they're like if the craft itself is emitting that, if they do that because of the way that they're able to like break the laws of physics, or that kind of stuff always interests me. Like shape, we had the acorn one with the hieroglyphics, and now we have this one. You said it was like an orb.
Yeah, a silver object, and yeah, they're saying it spun like a top. So I'm picturing something kind of acorn shaped, spinning like a top.
Interesting. Cool. All right. Didn't mean to cut you off there. I just wanted to make sure I'm keeping track, you know?
So yeah, moving on, later that year, 2 women saw a disc hovering close to some high tension lines. Again, that area you're talking about, like right above the tree line. And as they drove closer, the object dipped under the power lines and started toward their car. And that's probably about where I would have crapped myself. Avoiding a collision, it flew by, and the women were able to note some details. A dark-colored, oblong shape with a type of tail on the back and deep grooves along the body. My extremely intellectual theory here is that maybe these visitors wanted some Rolling Rock. The Latrobe Brewing Company was founded in 1893, but it was recently bought by Anheuser-Busch.
Ah, I like where this is going.
Yeah, those evil bastards closed the Latrobe Brewery and moved it to Newark, New Jersey, which may explain the recent abundance of UFO sightings in New Jersey. It looks like those poor guys are still searching for Rolling Rocks.
You know, I have heard plenty of UFO stories of them being like near or above bodies of water. I wonder if you found a correlation where apparently maybe UFOs like breweries.
Yeah.
I had not thought of this. We might be onto something.
Right? And all of a sudden I feel like I can hang out with these guys.
It might not be all bad, but then if they steal all the good beer and then they just, don't leave you anything, who knows? Maybe they have to use it for fuel and they don't even drink it.
Oh man, keep them away.
Yeah. All our best IPAs will be used for rocket fuel. Well, man, that's awesome. I love that the theme of everything kind of really ties together. I love the different stories that you have found. I think that with all of this, I love the different fascination points that you can find with each of these things because they're corroborated by multiple witnesses. You have the military involved. All of those things to me make the story that much more credible. It's not just like one person or, one specific thing that found him. We have other stories that I have in mind for in the future where you don't have that. And that's kind of why I put them off a little bit more. But the ones where you can have multiple witnesses and it has stood the test of time, people are still telling the story, I think is just super awesome.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so I have for you, my friend, quite a great story. So my story took place in September 12th of 1952, and it takes place in Flatwoods, West Virginia. So one of the things that I want to keep in mind, earlier that year, in July of 1952, there were multiple encounters over the U.S. with jets over Washington with UFOs. The Louisville Courier-Journal in 1952 quoted Major Roger Ramey for a news conference stating that interceptor planes had been scrambled hundreds of times as a result of UFO sightings. In the same year, in the Seattle Post, in July, they read an article with the title, "Air Force Orders Jet Pilots to Shoot Down Flying Saucers If They Refuse to Land." So just keep all that in mind as we're going through all of this. This is like the summer of UFO sightings. The other thing to keep in mind is that during this time, people are very still, they had the Ground Observer Corps, which is like thousands of people in the United States that their job, like their hobby, was watching the skies to make sure we weren't going to get attacked by another country. So we were that much more, as a culture, looking up and seeing what was going on in the skies. I mean, now I kind of have to remind myself from time to time, like, hey, you're outside, look up.
True, and that's a whole layer to a lot of these stories in that time frame, is the Cold War, and also being afraid of what could come from the skies.
Yeah, a lot of people referred to this particular summer as the summer of saucers. There were over 1,501 reported sightings that summer.
What year was this again?
1952.
Okay.
The Ground Observer Corps that I was talking about earlier was over 100,000 people that were involved in watching the skies of America against attack in World War II.
Wow.
Yeah. A man from Connecticut named Frank Ficino is the man who dedicated basically his life to researching this case. And so if you want to check this out, you can go to flatwoodsmonster.com. He wrote a whole book about it, and you can check it out. I always find it interesting when these guys, dedicate so much time to just completely delve into one specific case. So I've gone through listening to like several interviews and kind of pieced together the story, and I'm just going to kind of tell it to the best of my ability. There are a couple parts that I wasn't able to figure out what happened during, and I'll kind of go through that as we go. But if you want to figure this out for yourself or go find out about it, flatwoodsmonster.com.
This is awesome. I'm really excited for this. Sherry and I just planned a trip to go down and do some hiking in Virginia, go to the spot of this encounter, and then I don't know if you know this or not, but Point Pleasant is only about an hour or less away from there. So we're hitting, Braxton County, where the Flatwoods Monster was sighted, and then Point Pleasant, and visiting the Mothman Museum.
Yes, I would love to do the Mothman one time. We're going to have to do like a more prolonged episode on that with all the different encounters.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so the other thing to keep in mind with this is that it was also investigated by Project Blue Book. So, all right, on September 12th, 1952, there were 21 hours of sustained UFO sightings over the United States. There were over 116 sightings of these crafts in over 10 states. They were reportedly 4 different UFOs that crash landed on U.S. soil on that one day. So basically think of it as there were 3 craft that appeared off of the east coast of the Washington, D.C., basically due east almost exactly. They just appeared off the coast. Another craft came up from Florida. Joke.
Florida, man.
Yes, place joke here. So 3 of the objects literally appeared off the eastern coast. All 3 of the objects are said to have appeared about 90 miles east of the coast of Washington, D.C. The 4th object flew up from the south. Project Blue Book claimed all of these objects, all of them, were created by the same meteor. Let that sink in.
It does not compute.
The first object flew southwest over the no-fly zone of the Oak Ridge National Laboratories. So not supposed to be there. The second
get shot.
That's right. The second object appeared minutes later and went northwest and crashed near Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So 2 different things that crashed, but same meteor.
Yeah, you're making a statement there and bringing all the soldiers to the yard.
Yeah, right. The third object that came in made a line directly over Washington, D.C. The object passed so closely to our nation's capital that it was actually called the Flame over Washington by the New York Times. And this was roughly about 7 o'clock at night, okay? About 25 minutes after the object passed over Washington, D.C., it actually landed in Braxton County. So if that was a meteor, it would have taken seconds for it to get from D.C. to Braxton, not 25 minutes. The object traveled at about 400 miles per hour. It's estimated that a meteor could reach that distance in 7 seconds. But
that meteor probably didn't stop off for some Rolling Rocks.
That's true. Maybe they had to. There were several breweries, I'm sure, in between those 2 locations. The object flew over D.C. and directly to Burnsville, West Virginia. The object then made a 45-degree turn south and followed along the highway to Flatwoods. The object was oval-shaped. It was approximately 32 feet in length, and it was engulfed in flames. Very similar to what your story was about the red aura around the craft, which is why I wanted to highlight that. I wonder if when these things come through, because it's kind of theorized that these craft were damaged.
Okay.
So something must have caused for them to, maybe they got shot at, maybe the government knew they were coming, who knows?
Maybe just dealing with new pressure in our atmosphere or getting into our atmosphere.
Yep. So at about 7:25, the object moved towards a school playground where several boys were playing football. The object passed over their heads and crashed into the mountaintop nearby. The boys ran to see what the object was that had crashed. The boys ran to the home of Miss Kathleen May. She was the mother of two of the boys that were in the group, Eddie and Freddie. The boys told the adults what happened, and two adults followed the boys out in search of the object. Kathleen and Glenn Lemon, 18, grabbed a flashlight with Freddie May and their dog and a neighborhood collie. So in total, you had 8 kids, 2 adults, and 2 dogs. So that's a lot of different witnesses, right? It's not just like one, it's not even just one family. You have 2 different groups of people from 2 different families, and you have not only just your dog, but the neighborhood dog.
Yeah, this is quite the entourage.
All right. So the group followed a path that went back off the May property. Up ahead, the group sees a fog that starts to roll down the hill. As they move towards the fog, the group starts to pick up the smell of sulfur. The closer they moved to the fog, the smell grew stronger and stronger. At one point, the neighborhood collie decides to scout ahead into the fog. The group hears the dog yelp, and the collie takes off back past the group and runs away. The group continued towards the huge oak tree. Would you keep moving forward at that point? I wouldn't.
No, there are probably a lot of times where I would have given up the ghost on this one.
Yeah. There's a weird fog that smells really bad. I don't think I want to be over there.
Yeah.
So,
what could go wrong?
Right? The group moved towards the huge oak tree that was on the property on the left-hand side of the path. As the group continued, Miss May noticed a sound that reminded her of frying bacon.
That can't be good.
When Miss May reached the tree, she noticed how strong the smell had become. She looked up to the left side of the tree, and her vision was met with 2 red glowing eyes. Miss May first thought that it was possibly an owl or maybe a raccoon that was perched up in the tree. Both adults flashed their flashlights up at the tree, and they illuminated a huge 12-foot metal structure. Miss May knew this was no owl or no animal. The group was within a few feet of the structure. It was almost as if it was hiding behind the huge oak tree until they walked right on top of it almost. As the group watched, the metal structure began to hover off of the ground. The group could see the structure appeared to be leaking some kind of substance. The base of the structure appeared to be about 4 feet, or just wider than 4 feet at the base. The structure tapered towards the top. As it moved in front of them, they noticed the eyes. They were really what appeared to be portholes. Covering the portholes was what looked to be glass. At one point, at the base of it, they saw what looked like pipes about the size of your forearm. The child Freddie May recalled the top of the craft appeared to him like a fighter pilot sitting in a cockpit. The pictures from this encounter I've seen are pretty creepy. So one of the things that I did was I included a photo of the craft, if you will, so that Soulless could see it as well. So Soulless, if you're looking at that, it's very different than almost any other UFO that I've seen depicted before. Instead of it being like, I've heard of like cigar shaped, so maybe you could say this was kind of cigar shaped, but it's like a long cylindrical tube that at the bottom of it kind of flares out a little bit more, kind of like for space. And instead of it sitting on its side, it like sits vertically. And so the base of it's a little bit wider. And then at the top of it, you can kind of see what looks like a person's head almost, but obviously not a regular person, inside of like a bubble almost that so they could like see outside of the craft.
Yeah, it almost looks like it has this kind of pointy shaped bonnet over that head as well.
I mean, it's very different than almost anything else that I've ever seen depicted before. And so if you see the picture that's right below that, and I'm going to try to find a way that I can get something that's in the background so you guys can see what I'm talking about. We might have my buddy Paul draw something up so that you guys can kind of see his own depiction of it. But you'll see a drawing below that, and that's one of the drawings that was done by one of the kids. And then you also see that there's a depiction of it for when it was on a local TV show as well. So several people all depicted this the exact same way almost. There was like little variations here and there, but the general idea of what this thing looked like, multiple people all said it looked the same.
Yeah, it looks like a more creepy, more complicated Dalek from Doctor Who.
I like that. That's a good way people can kind of get the image. So the craft, this 12-foot craft, moves in front of the group and continues to the right of the path. As it moved into the middle of the field, the group saw what appeared to be the bottom point of the structure. The group ran back to the house and phoned the police. And this is the part of the story that I had, like, they go through, they see the fog, they run up to the oak tree, they see the craft. The craft moves directly in front of them across their path and over to the right, because remember, the tree's on the left-hand side of the path. I could not find what happened from the point of them seeing the craft, other than they just ran back to the house. I don't know if there was one particular thing that caused for all of them to run back to the house, but at some point, they all booked it back to the house and decided to call the local authorities. So the local sheriff, believe it or not, was too busy to come out and find out what was going on. So the
got time for that.
Yeah, the first person out to the scene was actually a local reporter. And when he got out to the farm to investigate, the reporter found tracks off of the trail, and in the middle of the field, he found a large 4-foot, what he described as a landing zone. They said that they could actually see like rocks were depressed into the ground around the area, so that like it looked like something had landed, like something heavy had fallen in that one particular spot and it left a 4-foot round indent into the soil.
Yeah, if this thing was really, what we understand as steel and metal, it had to have been heavy from the pictures.
And what I love is when the reporter came back to the family's house and was like, hey, can one of you guys show me like where the craft was? They were like, no.
We're good.
Yeah, I'm not going back there, dude. No, you can go see where it was. I'm not going back there. So later that night, the National Guard actually showed up on the farm. They had about 40 men and a colonel. They investigated the area and they took samples. The men stayed overnight just in case the craft came back. The guy, Frank Ficino, actually interviewed the colonel, and he said that he sent off the samples and actually never heard anything back from the Air Force about the samples.
They just kept them for themselves.
This was such a big ordeal that the town of Flatwood is estimated to have about 300 people living there. It was estimated that in the next few days and months, over 10,000 people would visit the town to try to see what happened there.
True.
So, you know how your story also had like a little bit of an offshoot to it?
Mm-hmm.
So, not even that much later from this particular incident, and not even that much further away, there was a family that were driving their car. And as they were driving, they had heard like an odd humming sound, a weird noise that caused them to kind of stop the car. And it was a man and his wife and their child that was in the back seat. And when they stopped, the baby had started to cry. And they said that had kind of like got their attention. And then they had felt something kind of like slam down on the hood of the car. And when they looked out to see what it was, they had saw what looked very similar to the craft that we had described to you.
Oh, wow.
So they hear this huge crash onto the front of the car. They look out to the front and they see what had basically been described, but it looked like the top half of the craft was gone. And this thing was like half spacecraft, half almost lizard person.
Whoa.
And I'm not a fan of like lizard people theories, so I always like to throw that out there. I'm not that guy. If you want that, go somewhere else. But
that's a whole different rabbit hole there.
Yeah, for real. But if you look at the depictions of this, it does look very reptilian in all of its features. So this guy, Frank Ficino, basically was talking about, from his estimations, like on that particular day, they just were sending a warning shot. Like, hey, look at what we can do. We can fly craft over no-fly zones. We can go over Wright Pat. We can go over DC, and you can't do anything to stop us.
It's a big flex.
Yeah, exactly. A big flex. So those craft, he also believed, were all meeting up with one another because he thinks the Flatwood monster craft got damaged somehow, and essentially it was trying to find a way to essentially get back in touch with the other craft so they could all get out. So like they did their big flex, and then it was all right, now we need to go home. So
we can't show them we're hurt.
Yeah, exactly. But they did, all of those craft moved from where they had eventually come in, and they all were kind of converging on a specific area. So it's really cool. Like this is well before my time, before I was ever thought of, back in 1952. So if you guys want to check this out, again, flatwoodsmonster.com. Again, I've kind of pieced this together from a couple different interviews from that, and also richarddolan.com. He's like one of my favorite UFO researcher guys. I don't jive with every single thing that he puts out there, but I do like the overall style of how he puts out information. So that's what I'll always recommend. So richarddolan.com and also flatwoodsmonster.com.
Nice.
So that's going to wrap up our story section here for this episode. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Make sure you hit subscribe. Make sure you hit like. Let us know in the comment section below what you think. We're going to try to keep molding this and evolving this until we really, really love it. The previous format we felt like needed a little bit of like a change, so we're just working on that as we go through. We're still going to finish up Dyatlov Pass Part 3. We just need a little bit more time to finish up the research on that and kind of put the whole episode together. Those take a lot of time for us to sit down and kind of put everything, in order and all that fun stuff. So make sure you guys hit subscribe, make sure you like, check out our previous episodes, make sure we hit those in the stream as well.
Thanks a lot, Brandon. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, man. Thank you, Soulless. I definitely do appreciate it. And I hope everybody out there has a wonderful rest of their night.
Yes. Thank you. Good night.